Have been plagued by the so-called textbook controversy. We feel that most everyone is basically familiar with the fact that a group of textbooks are the subject of complaints from a group of parents and interested persons. For various and familiar reasons, it has been demanded that this group of texts be summarily removed from Kanawha County schools. The net effect of this protest has sparked a bitter controversy in our area, resulting in the resignation of the president of the school board, probably influenced the resignation of the county school superintendent, and has further indirectly contributed to mass picketing, shootings, dynamiting, firebombing, and jailing of some participants, and in general created chaos in our school system. Tonight, we are hopeful that we can generate some answers and perhaps some solutions to this more than vexing problem through free and open debate. We have invited two well-known citizens who represent opposing views on the textbook controversy. By providing this public platform, we fervently hope that we can contribute a constructive approach to the problem, free of rancor and dedicated to the common good of all of our citizenry and, more importantly, to our children. Now here is our moderator for tonight's debate, Mr. Mort Victorson.
Good evening. This is Mort Victorson, WTIP Special Events. With us tonight in our studios for this live debate are Mrs. Alice Moore, an elected member of the Kanawha County Board of Education and a critic of most of the textbooks, and Mr. Lee Platt, chairman of the Kanawha Coalition for Quality Education. The issue to be debated this evening is that the textbooks in question be permanently removed from the Kanawha County school system. Speaking for the question will be Mrs. Moore, and speaking in opposition to the question will be Mr. Platt. Prior to airtime tonight, Mr. Platt won a toss of a coin and has elected to speak second. The ground rules for this debate are simple. Each speaker will be allotted a 5-minute opening statement. Following the opening statements, each participant may make a 2-minute statement or rebuttal in rotation until the close of the debate. Each participant will be allowed up to a 3-minute summation. I wish to point out that the views expressed tonight by Mrs. Moore and by Mr. Platt do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of WTIP and WTIO-FM. To begin our debate this evening, here now is Mrs. Alice Moore.
Thank you. I think it's significant to this discussion that the majority of people in West Virginia do, in fact, believe in God and believe in the inspiration of the Bible, meaning that they believe that the recorded events in the Bible are factual. This was pointed out just recently by a study that was recently conducted by Dr. Charles Lively, who's the head of the Department of Geography at Morris Harvey College. Dr. Leibel, was himself very much surprised to learn that this strong, fundamental Christianity not only holds true of the rural areas of West Virginia, but is just as true in the urban areas. I think because of this, because of the standards of our people and the kinds of people that we have in this state, it is a slap in the face to the people of Kanawha County for the Board of Education to thrust upon them books which offend their belief in God and which offend their every sensibility to the standards of decency. Every vice known to man has been introduced to our children in these textbooks, not from the standpoint of showing them to be wrong, but in a totally non-judgmental atmosphere. By vices, I mean adultery, stealing, prostitution, revolution, murder, and such like. I believe people have taken leave of their senses when they attempt to present in a non-judgmental way the views of such writers as Eldridge Cleaver, Malcolm X, George Jackson, and interviews in a non-judgmental way with such people as Charles Manson. And yet all of these people are represented in our textbook. Eldridge Cleaver is a admitted rapist. He boasts of the fact that he began his rapes on black women and in his practice on black women, and then advanced, as he said, to white women for ideological purposes. Malcolm X, of course, was a advocate of the violent overthrow of our government, was an admitted racist, a hater of white people. This same thing is true for Eldridge Cleaver. George Jackson's picture appeared in our papers across the nation with a shotgun to the head of a judge moments before he literally blew the man's head off, and yet we present these people in a non-judgmental way to our children. Charles Manson is presented in our textbooks, and he comes across as a man who loves his fellow man in spite of the hatred that his fellow man might show for him. And yet this man is a convicted murderer in the most brutal way of Sharon Tate and others in her household. The charge has been made that the academic freedom of teachers is under attack with the protest over the textbooks. But in fact, academic freedom, total academic freedom in a school system where attendance is compulsory for our minor children is not academic freedom at all, but academic tyranny. The law recognizes that children can be easily swayed and influenced by adults, and as such, children are not held accountable to the full extent for their crimes, though the adult who tempted them or in some way persuaded them to commit this crime may be held in full contempt of the court. For this reason, we cannot allow teachers to have total academic freedom with minor children. There's a great deal of difference on the college level where a teacher is dealing with adults. At the public level of the educational school system of elementary and even secondary children where they are still minors, we have to recognize that parents are the sole legal guardians of their children and that they bear the sole responsibility for the also have to take upon themselves the responsibility for the results of this, and the parents will have to be held not accountable. And this is not the case at this time. The Supreme Court ruling with regard to the Madeline Murray case versus the state of New York pointed out that we cannot use the classrooms to indoctrinate children in a Christian philosophy. And as a result of this, it becomes also apparent, as is pointed out in the case, that we cannot indoctrinate children in a philosophy that is alien to the religious views of the parents. We are, in fact, with these textbooks, indoctrinating children in a philosophy that is alien to these religious views. And it's our contention and the contention of the parents that this is a violation of their constitutional rights. Now, if the state has, in fact, taken away from parents, have I completed my time? I'm sorry.
All right. Now we'll hear from Mr. Lee Platt, and he also will have 5 minutes in which to give his opening statement.
I am concerned that these textbooks, which have been legally adopted, are not being used by my children. I believe that our educational system will suffer greatly as a result of the textbook removal. The right to study new ideas and the subsequent right to accept or reject these ideas is fundamental to America's greatness. In 1890, one's world consisted entirely of Charleston, West Virginia, Sacramento, California, or Bombay, India, depending on his place of residence. Then, as now, books were the windows to the world, enabling the Charlestonian to visit Sacramento or Bombay without a tiresome journey. Because of television, other forms of mass communication, and high-speed transportation, the entire earth is now truly our world. But books are still our windows to the world. Through them, we can understand the braking system on a car before we need it, how Hindus believe without becoming one, or the effects of marijuana without smoking it. Closing windows so your child sees only the world you want him to see may be your right, and it may sound good. No stealing, no bullies, no pagan people, no dope, no violence. One religious belief, one form of government. I want the windows to be open for my children because I am confident that their character is strong enough to study other beliefs, question, analyze, and compare these to their own, then accept what is good and become a better person for it. One's personal sense of right and wrong is perhaps enough for educating one's own children, but not for educating all of the students in Kanawha County. The people in this world believe and say and do many complex things. Knowledge and experiences to prepare our children to live in Charleston, Sacramento, or even Bombay must be broader than the particular likes, dislikes, or personal beliefs of a few thousand people in Kanawha County. A major fear in the minds of some good, honest people is that students who read about thieves will become thieves. The purpose of reading is not to mimic the behavior of characters, but to learn about the broad range of human experience, what people do and why they do it. From these human experiences, the student can learn to think and not be indoctrinated. A democracy emphasizes individual responsibility and individual decisions. It is the most complex form of government and requires a definite human maturity. For this maturity to be developed, we must gain an understanding of people not only within our country, but of people across the world. For it is only through understanding and knowledge that we can recognize those who truly threaten our democratic society. A democratic education must recognize the equality and uniqueness of all students and provide them with a means to attain their ultimate potential. This means is called thinking, which is developed by questioning, analyzing, and understanding. Memorizing may be necessary, but quoting Shakespeare without thinking about it is pointless. On the other hand, a dictatorship attempts to wipe out individualism and humanity. In a dictatorship, only actions, thoughts, and sentiments which help to increase the power of the nation can be called good. A dictatorship leads to destruction of all free cultural and intellectual exchange with other nations. This absolute devotion to the nation becomes the guiding principle of all education in a dictatorship. In 1956, then-Senator John F. Kennedy said, "Freedom is not divisible into political expression and literary expression. The lock on the door of the legislature, the parliament, or the assembly hall, by order of the king, the commissar, or the Fuhrer, has historically been followed or preceded by a lock on the door of the printers, the publishers, or the booksellers." I believe that the textbooks in question open windows, encourage questioning, analyzing, and understanding. They will strengthen the student's maturity. They are interesting and stimulate the students to think. I haven't enjoyed or agreed with all that I've read, and I would be inconsistent if I did. Mrs. Moore, you have expressed concern for the rights of those opposed to the books, and for that I sincerely commend you. But what about my rights? Books that were professionally selected and legally adopted have been removed from the schools. My children wonder why, and I want them to use those books. I contend that my rights have not been protected. What is your proposal for restoration of the learning environment in Kanawha County?
Okay, we've had our opening statements from our two participants, and we now will enter into our period of rebuttal. And Mrs. Moore, you will now have 2 minutes for first rebuttal.
All right, the right to use books that teach an approach to life, an ethical outlook on life that is contrary to that of other parents, whether they be a majority or a minority, does not exist in our schools. The Supreme Court proved this when they ruled that our children could not be indoctrinated in a Christian philosophy in the classroom, and at the same time ruled that we cannot indoctrinate them in a philosophy alien to, and I say Christianity, to their particular religious convictions. We cannot indoctrinate, nor can we take away or can we alienate a child from their religious convictions in the classroom. These books, in fact, teach a situation ethics approach to life which is totally alien to the beliefs of many people, and as Dr. Leibel's study shows, to an overwhelming majority of people in West Virginia. Now, secondly, I want to ask you, where is the law that specifically takes to the state the right to teach children a moral, ethical, religious view contrary to that held by their parents? The Constitution of the United States, Articles 9 and 10, specified that those rights not specifically spelled out in the law as retaining to the Constitution or to the state are, in fact, retained by the people. And it is by natural law that parents have the right to rear their children according to their own ethical, moral, religious beliefs without interference from the state. Now, do I have time to?
Yes, sir.
All right, let me give you an example of this. When children are told that the going out in the street and making a living by stealing, rebelling against any and all authority, rebellion toward the police, rebellion toward parents, rebellion toward our government. The books are replete, and we didn't get into this, and I regret it very much, that the books are filled with examples of the invasion of the privacy of the home and disrespect for parents, with children asked to role play in the classroom, and in fact arguing and debating with their parents on something that their parents have instructed them to do. They're not taught to love and respect their parents, but rather to argue with them. We present to them the views of Malcolm X, Eldridge Cleaver, George Jackson, people who are confirmed murderers, but we present them in actually a sympathetic atmosphere. They are presented with in their
own words, expressing their own feelings, and there is nothing in the books at all to rebut their feelings. Our children are presented these things in a non-judgmental atmosphere. The teachers do not teach them that these attitudes are wrong. We are asking our children to make judgments on things which they have no factual basis for making a judgment. It would be utterly ridiculous, for example, to present to our children all the views of the communist from the standpoint of the communist writer, which can really sound very, very very presentable, very acceptable, and yet at the same time not present our children with the facts to rebut those very things that the communists are advocating. If we are going to, we can't present children with the necessity of making judgments when they have no basis for making that judgment. The schools, our teachers, are responsible adults with the full capacity for swaying the minds of our children, and we all recognize this fact. Some teachers are good, some are bad. Thank you.
I guess I can see the basic difference in our philosophy. You know, I believe sincerely that people learn not only by their accomplishments, but perhaps learn even more by their mistakes. And this is why I feel that a proper combination of positive and negative type questions, and I feel there is a proper combination, is good. I also feel that there is a good combination of good and bad in the strict sense of the word, or as different people view it in these books. You know, there are writings from Lincoln, there's John Kennedy in the same War and Peace book that you quoted. John Kennedy's inaugural address is there. So that there are the good and bad parts there. And the question I'm asking you is, I'd like to know what you feel in these books are the good parts.
May I answer his question?
Yes, you have 1 minute. You have 1 minute left of Mr. Platt's time if you want an answer in that time.
Okay. John Kennedy's inaugural address is very fine, but we can have John Kennedy's inaugural address without having to introduce our children to a convicted rapist and murderer. We can have the good out of the books. There are many books that we can have for our children, but without having to introduce the sorry, sordid side of life. I don't think it is our responsibility to introduce our children to all thoughts and philosophies of life. Some are not worth their consideration. Some are not worth the consideration of any civilized adult person, and that is something we have learned as parents. We have learned from the past experiences of our ancestors, not from our own personal experiences. We can't know how horrible the loss of our freedom would be from our own experiences, but we do know it from the experiences of the past. We have to pass on to our children these experiences that we have learned. We don't do that by presenting as on an equal basis the views of the rapist and the murderer and the revolutionist with the views of the great men of our society.
All right. Now, Mrs. Moore, in keeping with the pre-established basis we would operate, you now have up to 3 minutes for a summation.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know I had any more time. Okay. We have a series of textbooks that are filled with examples of the worst of life. We have a series of elementary textbooks specifically that again and again encourage our children to take the wrong attitude toward life. Examples are used, pictures are used, and children are to tell their own stories about stealing. In every case, in the elementary textbooks, when children are told to tell their own stories, we don't see in a story that the possibility of them telling a story that's uplifting, that's inspiring, but they're told to put themselves in the context of the thief, the child who violates the law, the child who turns in the false fire alarm. They're told to discuss their home and family relationships. Have you ever been punished by your parents for something they thought you did but you really didn't do? And never do you see the mother smiling at the child, hugging her warmly, or the pleasant side of life. We talk about presenting reality to our children, and yet all we're presenting to our children is the sordid, ugly side of life. Today, the leading cause of death among children of an unnatural nature is suicide. And yet, you take a look at these books and you see nothing but the dark, ugly side of life presented to them, and it's no wonder that suicide is becoming the leading cause of death, or is the leading cause of death among our young people in this age. There's one book in particular on the secondary level, the 11th grade book, called The Human Condition, in which Christianity is mentioned again and again repeatedly throughout the book, and yet every reference to Christianity, every example is critical. Not once is it presented in a positive light, not once is it presented in any way but a most foolish, depraved, undesirable manner. And now, again, we are not presenting to our children a balanced attitude toward life. We present the black child as incapable of getting out of his
position, as put down by his country, as constant, as hatred, excuse me, as hating his own nation. And yet, this is not true. Every child in this nation does have the opportunity to progress, and we had better start telling our children what a wonderful, marvelous nation they live in. If this is not the best, then where is a better one? And yet we don't once in these books present to them the idea that this is the finest nation on earth. They have the finest system of government on earth. We constantly tear down their government. We suggest to them that all of America is black and bleak, that our politicians are crooks, and they do this repeatedly, Mr. Platt, throughout the Language of Man series, that politicians cannot be trusted, that they are not intelligent people, and that they are crooks, as I said. We present communism as not a threat to the nation. We may see several references to the atrocities of the Jews, but I find nothing with reference to the atrocities of the communist. And yet the communist is the threat in today's nation, not the German government. But this is I think we set up a straw man for our children without teaching them what their real enemies are today.
Sorry, Ms. Moore, but your time is up.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Platt, 3 minutes,
Well,
please.
I feel quite strongly that, and again, I realize that some of the sad side of life, the violent side of life, is there. And yet I feel that the positive side of life, the happy side of life, is also there. And I feel that we can learn, and I feel my children can learn by looking at both. And I think, to bring my point across, I have a poem from Counterpoint by Robert Tristan Coughlin that I would like to use for my summary. Across the years he could recall his father one way best of all. In the stillest hour of night the boy awakened to a light. Half in dreams he saw his sire with his great hands full of fire. The man had struck a match to see if his son slept peacefully. He held his palms, each side the spark his love had kindled in the dark. His two hands were curved apart in the semblance of a heart. He wore, it seemed, to his small son, a bare heart on his hidden one, a heart that gave out such a glow no son awake could bear to know. It showed a look upon a face too tender for the day to trace. One instant it lit all about, and then the secret heart went out. But it shone long enough for one to know that hands held up the sun.
Well, our time is just about up. Mrs. Moore, we're sorry that your commitment will not permit us to continue with the debate. We certainly thank you very much, you, Mrs. Moore, and you, Mr. Platt, for a most informative program. We feel certain that our listeners, hopefully, are now better informed on the basic school book controversy. This debate between Mrs. Moore and Mr. Platt has been a public service presentation of WTIP and WTIO-FM. I'm Mort Victorson. Thank you, and good night.